All right, guys, this is episode, I think, 14. The higher we get with these numbers, the harder it is for me to remember. But this one I'm particularly excited about. We got John Degl. If you guys don't know, just like we were talking about Coach Bill yesterday, if you don't know who John is, you must be living under a rock in Section 1. He's been around, for a very long time, coaching a lot of elite guys for a very long time. In high school, John was a state champ. He went to Manhattan College. I think he was on scholarship there, if I remember correctly, and decided that, it wasn't the place for him. He wanted to go to Iowa. Basically just decided to pick up and leave and go to Iowa. If you guys, me and Coach Sabellis and John were just talking about it, if you guys follow Flo, watch the Bader show on Flo, it's archived, and he talks about the story of how Dan Gable basically was like, dude, what are you doing here? Like, you can't be wrestling. And he kind of just stuck with it, did it. Ended up being a starter for them, NCAA qualifier, beat Lee Fullhard in a wrestle-off, who ended up, I think, is the only American that's ever had wins over Kel Sanderson, as far as I know. Had a nice win there. They went back and forth, but John ended up going heavyweight when he probably was a 190-pounder. I guess that's the next weight class below back then.
Yep.
So that's basically John's career. We could go back and forth with that. But just like I've started every interview, John, what made you even start wrestling in the first place? Like, what got you into this?
A friend of mine was a 91-pounder in 8th grade, and he was afraid to walk to the high school by himself. We were on the same campus, but he was afraid to go to the high school. He's like, come with me. And I had no intention of wrestling. I didn't even think it was an option. Never heard of the sport. None of my parents, my dad never wrestled. No family members wrestled. So I walk over to the high school with him, and I watch practice. I'm like, oh, this is cool. And these guys are fighting, and they're not getting in trouble. So I was like, sign me up. And the coach, again, wouldn't let me wrestle. So John Battersby was a super athlete, but he was 91 pounds in 8th grade, and I was 155. So we went over there, and he's like, go back to modified. We can't have you, John. Battersby's 91 pounds. We need the spot, but you can't wrestle varsity. You got to go to modified. So I went back to modified for about 2 days, and the coach was a great guy, really nice guy, Mr. Cerrone. He was a math teacher, I think. I think he coached me in golf years later, or maybe baseball. I forget. But I liked the guy. I just didn't like him as a coach. Even as an 8th grader, I was like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. And why on earth would I want to start at a sport when I could clearly see these guys are terrible and the varsity team's different? Like, I could tell the difference in one practice. So I went back to the varsity practice, and I said, I'm not wrestling modified. I'm wrestling varsity or JV. That guy is terrible. And the coach is like, no, you can't. So then he gives me that stupid paper, like a month, not even a month, like 2 weeks left in the season. I went to practice for like 3 weeks without any ability to practice. I just watched for the same exact thing that happened in college. My coach in high school wouldn't let me wrestle. And Joe Bellucci was like, finally he gave in. He gave me the paperwork, hoping that I wouldn't pass. I go to the doctor. He circles 3 or 4, whatever it was. I pass. I go to practice. One of the first days I practiced, I don't know if Rich McHale watched, but it's a pretty funny story. He's like older than me and already a good wrestler. And we're doing a scrimmage against Hen Hut. It's like this is like maybe my first, second, or third practice. He tells me, hey, you should put a half in if someone does that. So I put a half in, and he clamps down, kind of rolls me over, and slams my elbow in a crack in the mat, almost breaks my elbow in 2, pins me, stops the mat, and starts laughing. I'm like, that's messed up. I'd never wrestled before. So years later, every time I see him or I meet someone and knows him, I tell him Rich is a bully, and that he beat me up the first day I had practice.
Oh, that's funny.
That's how I got into wrestling. I just wanted to wrestle as soon as I saw what they were doing.
Well, if there's one thing, a lot of people would say a lot of things about John, and me knowing John as well as I do, it's that John's a good guy. But people will say whatever, but John's persistent. If there's one thing, he's persistent, because that same story, that's so weird. That whole Gable story was like John kept showing up for weeks, and then eventually Gable let him do it, and he ended up being a real guy there. And that's funny. I didn't know that was your high school story too. That's pretty interesting.
I forgot about it until you asked me. I totally forgot that he wouldn't let me practice
That's
because
crazy.
he was
That's,
just like, "You're an eighth grader. You can't be on this team."
and you weren't
And
small. You must have been pretty big for an eighth grader.
I was 155.
Yeah, so you weren't small. That's hard. An eighth grader growing up
No,
at 155.
I was like 5'9", 5'8", 155, and I played football and I played baseball, and I wanted to find a different sport. I hated basketball. It's funny, Quincy's dad, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is the reason why I don't play basketball. So around maybe let's just say fourth grade for argument's sake. I don't know how old I was. Kevin's 2 years older than me, Quincy's dad, and I go out for a team in local rec basketball, like the lowest level of basketball. Kevin's on the team. Obviously, he's been playing for years. And the first day we have practice, and like right in the beginning, they give out jerseys. So I snatched, like, I think it was number 9. I snatched. It was the highest number that we had, and I always like 32 or 16. If I had to go with 24, I'd go with 24. So I always got my number because I was the best athlete most of the time on any team. It was me, Kurt, and Battersby, and that was pretty much like the top. Not the best, but we were usually one of the best, or if not the best guy on any team in baseball, football, whatever in town. Like always made the all-star teams. So I was just used to getting my way. And he's like, "That's my number," and he takes the shirt from my hand. I'm like, I'm ready to scrap with this guy. Day one, and I got the coach, like, who's a Greenpeace guy. He doesn't want any stress. And he's like, "No, Kevin's been on the team before." So they hand me a different number, and I'm bitter already. Very, very bitter. And so I guess after a while, we decided to scrimmage. Meanwhile, I've never played basketball before, and I've only horsed around in, like, the turnaround. I stink. I'm terrible. So I can't shoot, and I can't really do anything. So I'm going to D up Kevin Downs. So he gets the ball, and it's like half court defense. Well, I go full court, and I'm on him, and I'm annoying, and I steal the ball, and I dribble it, and I have a breakaway layup. I'm like, I'll show this guy. I'm number 9. And I go to get the layup, and I shoot the ball to the bottom of the backboard, and it hits me in the head. I look like the whole team's just watching because we're not really playing live. It's more like a scrimmage practice, but I'm taking it like the NBA Finals, and they just look at me. And that was the first day and the last time I knew I was done playing basketball. I didn't quit. I played the season. I got like no minutes. I was terrible. Didn't get number 9, and I hated it every minute of it. Every time I went in, I got a foul. I was like, why do you even play this sport? You can't even touch anybody. So I knew basketball wasn't for me, and eventually I was able to find wrestling, which was suited to my personality.
So I want to get into your coaching because we could talk about your wrestling and your career probably for a whole nother episode, beating guys like Kerry McCoy in the state finals. That video popped up on Facebook or YouTube or something recently. We watched it when we were in high school. John had us watch it basically to tell us that his technique wasn't that good. He just figured out a way to win. And it really is kind of what happened, and Kerry McCoy, we all know, ended up being, unbelievable and Olympian. So John, when you came back from Iowa, I know the club, I was in it pretty soon when you started it up, but there was a little bit of time before that. Was that like just you and Mazurko? Like, how did you kind of start doing the Iowa style?
Yeah, well, I didn't start it. I was friends with Joe, and I was friends with, I was much, much closer with Anthony and Phil. Phil is the reason I went to Manhattan College. He was a year older than me and a section champ, and I just chickened out. I wanted to go to Iowa, and I kind of got scared, and also they told me not to come. So the first time I listened, I was like, you know what? I'll just beat their guy, whatever. And I wound up deciding on Manhattan College. The times were so different. I mean, the Northwestern coach called me up. I called him up, but he returned the call. He goes, if a kid doesn't come, I got to have a scholarship for you. I'm like, he's never seen me wrestle, doesn't even know my name. He's like, yeah, if this kid doesn't come, I'll give you 50%. And I was like, all right. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was going on all my recruiting trips for football. And then I won the states, and I was like, I didn't have the best football season. I got mono. We lost the bowl. I mean, we lost Carmel. We lost to Lakeland. Then we got in a crummy bowl and beat Lakeland in the bowl game. And it was just like anticlimactic. And I didn't like the fact that other people made my destiny. So I just decided to wrestle late, very late in my senior year. So I had to switch up all the colleges I was looking at, and it was like a panic. Like, what do I do? So I just picked Manhattan because Phil was there, and it was a safety school in terms of emotions. Like, I knew I'd have friends. I wasn't scared. It was close to home. I could still see my girlfriend if I wanted to. She was at Binghamton. I was scared. I was just a kid, and I didn't know what I wanted. And I was like, engineers make good money. I'll be an engineer. I didn't want to be an engineer. So
that was a very
there.
similar story that Coach Bill Swartfinger just told last night about football and not having any control, and that's why wrestling was his love, his number one sport, because he controlled his own destiny. So
yeah, that's why we ultimately picked it, and it's that's why I feel like it's the best sport. But back to the question, I mean, Phil was really close to me, and we were like kind of like brothers. And Anthony was a little younger, and we were pretty close. He was still in high school. Joe was a baby. I mean, Joe was annoying. Like, we'd just dunk his head in the pool, and he was a non-entity. He was so much younger. So after I was at Iowa, Joe started doing pretty well. And when I came home the first time, I was coaching at Hofstra. I didn't have a club, but I was working with Joe. I actually was teaching him how to drive. He almost killed me. He almost wrecked into a lake. I mean, he was a terrible driver. But his brother, Phil, is, I don't want to throw the label OCD, but Phil is an A-type personality. And Joe's dad had passed, and Phil was not a good driving teacher or anything. So, I wound up teaching him how to drive. And Anthony was still in school, so he wasn't around. Phil had already gotten a job and was kind of living on his own. So, I was like, I'll come home. I stayed at home a lot. I stayed at my uncle's. I stayed at Tom Ryan's, but I was around enough to get with Joe. And then I left again for Iowa, and Joe kept getting better and better and winning and winning. And then I came back from Iowa, and I coached at Hofstra again. And then I decided that college coaching was not a good way to make a living, because at the time, I mean, my starting salary was $20,000. I didn't have a computer in my office. I had to buy my own computer. It was crazy. It was crazy. Technology was just coming around, and everything was weird, and the salaries were terrible. And if you wanted to be a college coach, you had to move around a lot. And I had already moved Iowa, New York, all within 4 years. I was like, I'm done traveling. I'm just gonna start my own club, because I did a club with Tom Ryan at Hofstra. And I said, you can make a little bit of money, but you need a job. So I bounced around all odd jobs, but I started the club in Willie Carano's house. Oh. Coach Carano and Holly had this little bungalow. I think they bought from their grandmother. It was like Dr. Doolittle with all the animals. He had gecko, lizards crawling on it, like 6 dogs and cats. And they lived in it was no bigger than my office is right now. There was a bedroom. You can't even call it a kitchen. It was like a galley on a ship, and then a mini living room. And it was almost like an A-frame, I think. There was no second floor. There was no basement. It was so small. So we were all in there, and I just started writing things down and talking to them. And the next week, I started coaching kids in the barn. And that's probably when you came in, because I don't really know how it happened, but I had the Cola Giovanni's and I had the Flamios, and next thing you know, it was you and Steve Sharp. No, not Steve Sharp. The kid who swam. And Ein Frank and Danny Hall. Those are all the really beginning guys.
It's crazy. I'm gonna go. We'll get back to that in a second too, because I want to talk about those beginning times a little. But Coach Degl, do you remember? I know you guys know each other from high school, and it was the Carmel Mayapack rivalry. We don't need to go down that road right now. But
Mayapack is a hamlet of Carmel, so
let's not even go down there. But you remember when John? I know you
know what though, Coach. One thing though, the rivalries back then in national sports and local sports was different, and I think John has a great deal of play in that now, where you go to a tournament and all the good wrestlers
know
our
each other.
friends.
They're
You know what I
friends.
mean?
Yeah.
It's so much different. We did, and when we were in high school, Mayapack was Mayapack, and Carmel was Carmel. John will tell you. And we did not get along for whatever, it was a
I kind of
rivalry.
like that. I kind of like that, to be honest.
I
But
don't know. I think the kids these days are, think about Quincy Downs and
I like that they're friends. But I'm saying I like the fieriness of like, we're going at it. I kind of enjoy that. But you remember my question?
Nowadays, we'd be in jail for the stuff that happened. It's just not tolerated. I mean, there was like, we were not gangs, but it was very different, and there were fights and there were things that happened that this wouldn't be like, you couldn't get in trouble for what we did because it wasn't in school. But nowadays, the school would get involved. So it's just such a different era. I mean, a lot of the stuff was considered pranks back then, but now it'd be considered,
hate crimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
you couldn't do stuff like, I mean, it's just
rivalries.
totally different culture. Everybody
I like it
grows
better
up.
now.
I think it's better for the kids, long term, because
Better for wrestling.
it's safer, and people get together who are better.
Yeah.
Like there were kids in Carmel's team that I would have loved to work out with if I knew like what I know now. Then I would have loved to work out with Mastrangelo and those guys. They had good kids, and we were just enemies for no reason other than they went to Carmel. Like almost hatred for no reason whatsoever.
That is kind of crazy. But so wait, my question was going to be this though, Coach Degl, is I know you knew John as a wrestler, but do you remember kind of when he started coming back to the area and started coaching kids like Mazurko and that, or were you not back in coaching yet at the time?
Well, I was wrestling in college at Oswego, and I'd come back and run clinics in Carmel, and Mazurko used to come. He was, and that was just for the Carmel kids. But Anthony Mazurko used to bring them, and I'd work out with Anthony a little bit. So we were kind of doing that a little bit in Carmel. But no, I was over in Cornwall, so I wasn't really around after college.
Yeah.
I do remember him having the club, and I remember Joe Mazurko was wrestling, and then John came back and coached Mayapack soon after that.
Yeah. So do you remember? Right. I was in high school for that. That I remember very good. But I think I was in the club already for like 2 or 3 years when John did that. But I remember as a 7th grader, my first time going to the club, and there was a kid. I don't know if you remember, John. This kid, Anthony Boniello.
I know. I have his dad sold me his car.
Yeah, he's a good. The kid was a guy. I don't remember his dad, but Anthony himself was a really good kid. And I remember walking into the room. And there's really not that many kids yet, right? At the time, I probably thought it was a lot of kids because it was a small room. There's probably like 15 kids or so. So I was probably like, oh my gosh, like this is like, what is this? And me and Anthony scrapped. And John used to have this couch, like right outside like the little restroom. I remember sitting on it dead, sweating. There was like no AC at the time. There was nothing in there, right? And I was like, geez Louise, like I always thought I was this good wrestler and I was this guy coming up through youth, but it was like a whole different world. John, why don't you talk a little bit about maybe like the early stages of the club like then? Like it was different. I don't know how to really explain it.
Well, it was a little barbaric because, I'd come from I'd come from Iowa, which is the cream of the crop, especially back then. I mean, Gable won 9 titles in a row, then lost a few, then went on another run, 17 titles in all. I mean, I graduated in 96, and he won his last title, which was his 17th in 97, and then he retired. So, we were the best team. I had 4 national title rings. 4 out of 5 years we were first. 1 year we took second. And so I'm coming back going, hey, I'm going to talk to all the coaches. I'm going to help Section 1 get out of the basement of wrestling. And, at states, we're not doing well. At one point, there was a 10-year gap. Then Joe Mazurko won a state title. Then there was another 10-year gap. I'm not sure. I think Marcel Cooper's older, but I get confused. Then there was another 10-year gap. I mean, in 20 years, like 2 state champs. So then my era had some really good guys, way better than me. Emilio Collins was a 3-time All-American. Hirsch won for Cornell. But they didn't stick around wrestling, So I get back, and I'm like, I'm going to make friends with all the coaches. I want to do stuff. Joe Mahoney helped me right away. He was the coach of Mayapack. He would let me do stuff. Kind of like the club was at Mayapack for a little bit,
Hmm.
for a short while.
And they won
I
Um,
3
remember that.
consecutive titles.
Is that where I
well, yeah,
my
Mayapack won 6 out of 7 titles with. I
Yeah.
mean,
3
they
different
had
coaches.
a bunch of different coaches because of all the politics going on, but
But you
we,
coached
I
most of
coached
those
every
kids,
one of
right?
those kids
all of them.
Yeah, yeah.
all year long, and then what happened was they didn't really want me there. Like all the coaches, it was kind of an eye opener. Like they were like a yesing me at first when they thought I was just a kid, and then we had some guys start doing better, and because of the difference, and I was too immature to counsel the kids on how to act properly. I was more like, well, if you don't want to join me, then I'm going to crush you, and I'm going to just show everybody how bad of a coach you are. And unfortunately, that didn't help me business wise in a way, but it didn't hurt us that much either. I mean, I guess there's no way to know because we could have been a much bigger club sooner, but it was just like the old guard didn't want to give up any of their I don't know power or admit that there was a different way to do things. I mean, it was just a different. It was so different. There was no communication. It wasn't the internet yet. Like there wasn't a lot of phones. You weren't videotaping everything. So you know, it was just like a word of mouth thing, and people started showing up at the club, and we started winning around here right away. Not at the state level. We kept getting shellacked at the state level. It took years to get our first state champ, and Andrew Lindsay, I think, was the first state champ for the club. I think. Um,
Him or Brian, probably, because
Him or
Brian was like
Brian.
8th or 9th grader, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
I don't remember. I
It was
think
close.
Andrew's older than him. I think Andrew.
Andrew is older, but Brian won a lot younger, I think, so it might have been close.
Yeah,
Oh no, Brundage, maybe.
no,
No?
Brundage is older than Andrew.
Yeah, he won
I
though,
feel
didn't he?
like Andrew was the first state champ. Brian, I don't think Brian was the first club state champ, but it took a while. We didn't have any all-state guys for a while. Like Mike and Dave were all state, but Mike was all state because of like a Catholic kid, and he was really seventh, I think.
Mike was all state his junior year, 7th, I think. And his
Yeah,
senior year, he like shit the bed, if I recall.
he had a knee injury all year. He tore his ACL, didn't wrestle all year. He was the section champ, but didn't get all league.
Hmm.
They wouldn't give him all league because he didn't wrestle any league matches.
Yeah, Mike was good.
I was
Man.
like,
Mike was,
yeah, he's returning section champ, current section champ, but don't give him all league. And then they're like, oh, well, I guess we can give him all league. But that's like the mentality back then of the coaches. I mean, there's too much stuff to say because a lot of them are still coaching. But if you knew what went on and you took the fact that I was a jerk out of the equation, like you didn't, say like, hey, John's a jerk, so he deserves it. I might have deserved it, but it didn't change the fact that they were doing the job they were doing, which was massively substandard. I feel like when you get paid to do a job, you're supposed to do it well, and you're supposed to be educated. I mean, you're an educator by trade, most of them, and then you're coaching wrestling. You should get current. You should get current. And there are dinosaurs out there, and those kids were. I mean, the trip to Syracuse was a beer drinking. I'm just glad to be away from my family for the weekend. Let's hang out. Our kids are gonna go 0-2, and then we could put them on the bus home, and we can have a nice weekend by ourselves. I mean, Eric Romanino used to get a suite and have drinks up there, and the section would pay for it. I mean, and they would party. They would just go up there to party. It was just an old boys network, and then I was like a flashlight shining into the dark, and they hated me.
well, I think
A
times
lot
are
of them still
changing.
do.
Yeah, but I think times are starting to change because there's more coaches that are coming in and
Well,
pushing.
there's a lot younger guys. Even with the older guys that are still there, they're letting former wrestlers come back and kind of guide the way instead of being in total control. And then like guys like Barney Folsmith at Scarsdale. I mean, Berkowitz came through for him. One of the best kids he ever had, and that built a bridge, and we had a good relationship after that. But before that, it was terrible. You know what's funny about Corona? No one's allowed to shake hands anymore. One of the biggest problems my first year coaching at Mayapack was I refused to shake hands every match. It was not a thing in high school. And all of a sudden, I was like, what are we, the girl volleyball team? We shake hands every time? Like, what do we got? Shake hands 6 times? We shake hands before, we shake hands after. Why do we got to run over after a match and shake the coach's hand? Especially at the time, the coach is yelling, you're stalling, you're dogging the kid, what ref? And they're yelling, and then you got to go shake hands with this guy. Like at least let tempers cool down. So I told my guys, we don't shake hands. We go off, cool down, and we get a practice in because most matches aren't really a workout. Oh my God. You would think I was like burning the president effigy and like doing terrible things. Like everybody was furious that I wouldn't shake hands mid-match. And the fact that that was a thing is mind-boggling, especially fast forward to now when everybody's like, yeah, it's probably not a good idea to shake hands a million times a match, especially with kids. And it's just crazy how things have changed.
Well, I think some people, and I could see it where you would come when you would say that, but I think some people just take things a little bit too personally when it's really not personally. Like that's just something you chose to do because you thought it was better for your athletes. I don't have a problem with something that if you think you're benefiting your athletes, then do it. That's what it's all about at the end of the day. But it was totally different. Like I think I don't want to badmouth Coach Gleb because he did a lot of good things for us too. When we were younger, especially, he was always there in that sense. But like John said, the old guard didn't want to give up anything, right? So when I was in high school and myself, Greg, and Burke were going to John's, and again, this is not a slight at Coach Gleb. He did a lot of good things for us, but he wasn't getting us to the next level. He just wasn't, and John was.
I'll bash him. He was feeding you McDonald's and taking your money while he drove you to Florida and putting you in like roach motels.
But my point is that even my senior year, he didn't say it to me, Greg and Burke, because he knew we were going there and we were training. But he did tell the other kids, don't go or else you won't wrestle, right? And to me, that's the polar opposite of what like a Coach DeBellis is, right? Like right when I got to Greeley, Coach DeBellis was like, you just came out of college. What do you think we should be doing here? I mean, he had his own opinions, obviously, but it was more like, let's get the kids better. What are we going to do to get the kids better? And I think if more coaches have that mindset, the whole section would be better off. I think back then –
I think the shift has happened, though.
I think it has.
And I think that both of you guys are responsible for that in a lot of ways. I think that you guys have bridged that club school transition very well.
I think me and John too.
Doing very well.
I think me and John, like if people, I think I said in the Greg interview something about like we trained really hard because John wasn't as seasoned as a coach as he is now. But I don't think that's even really true either. The more I think about it, John was the reason me and Greg knew how to wrestle was because of John, and that's just a fact. I think John was just younger, and now he's like more, he knows how to deal with these people more, even if he disagrees with them. I don't know if you would agree with that, John. But
I agree with that. And also, I think a lot of coaches are more willing to communicate now. Like back then, Bill Swertberger was a mentor to me. I went from coaching varsity at Mayapack to modified at John Jay, because I couldn't work with Frank Mealy. It was terrible. So there was no way I was staying. My wife worked there, and the controversies that happened at Mayapack were so bad that it was not good for her. I was like, it's not worth it for the $3,000. And, I upset Danny Turner. Danny Turner was a great guy, loved him, loved his family, in the club, loyal. I mean, the dad helped me put in the heating. I mean, he was just tremendous club guy, and he's wrestling for a different school, and I got Hauser going. And because the way I am, during the match, I'm like, he's stalling, push the pace. And Danny was tired, and he was stalling, and Hauser was not as good of a wrestler or athlete, but because Danny Turner was one of the best athletes I've ever seen. And he was like Spider-Man strong. He could climb a building with his fingertips. But he got tired and lost that match. And Danny was a kid, and he was very offended. I personally thought I was helping Danny by showing him, like, hey, dude, you're vulnerable. Other coaches are going to say the same thing and get their kids to push you. So he took it as a negative, like I was trying to get my guy to beat him, when really I was just coaching the way I would have coached no matter what. Even if they were both in the club and we were in an off-season tournament, I'd have been yelling at Danny for not being in shape anyway. So, coaching the club and the team immediately became a problem, and I saw that. So for those reasons and for the fact that I could never work for Frank Mealy again, I decided that it was better, and they decided they weren't going to hire me anyway. So, people said I got fired, but that's not true. It just I decided that I would not work for them, and Frank was like, I wouldn't hire you back anyway. So either way, I wasn't going back, but I knew I wasn't going back because it was going to hurt kids that I cared about a lot that weren't going to be from Mayapack. And I saw that as a problem. And since I wanted to stay open year round, a lot of people told me, a lot of wrestling coaches from the area said, John, we'll support you if you don't coach during the season. And I was like, but that's not going to happen because we're not good enough to take those 3 months off and go backwards. And I didn't say it, but I was like, you guys are such beneath Long Island that we can't beat Long Island. Like, why am I going to stop coaching them after 9 months and not coach them for the 3 months that are most important for their colleges and careers? Because back then, off-season wrestling wasn't nearly as big. So, your state results were how you got recruited mostly, and then high school nationals. But, there was Fargo and there was some big things. But the Super 32, I don't even know if it started yet, but it wasn't big if it was started. And there wasn't Flow Nationals. There wasn't UWW. There wasn't Journeyman Classic. There wasn't, the Vegas stuff.
John, the first tournament we went to, the first big tournament we went to as a club, I think when I was in high school, was War of the Shore. That was like 2004, 2003. And they didn't have Flow Nationals. They didn't have Super 32. I guess, obviously, they had Fargo. But, yeah, War of the Shore was the first big travel team tournament I think we went to. And I was a junior going into my senior year in high school. So, it was different. It was totally different. But I think people need to understand, too, it's like me and Degl said, really, you got John, myself, Khalid, Alex, Brett. We all have different personalities, right? So,
sure.
They don't – I think a lot of these coaches that – and they unjustly, I think, dislike John maybe from things that happened 15 years ago or 20 years ago. I think if they knew John how he is now, or even how he was then, if they really knew how he was really then, they wouldn't have much of a problem. But, you shouldn't be hurting your kid just because of grudge you hold from 15 years ago. The proof's in the pudding, right? The kids are successful out of Empire. That's just what it is. Even when I was in high school, like John said, on the local stage, the section finals was probably 26 Iowa style guys out of the 30. You know what I mean? It was Iowa style versus Iowa style in the finals a lot of the times, and coaches didn't like that. It wasn't like it is now, because now there's so many more Connecticut guys in the club, and there's other clubs, New Jersey. Kids can train by watching stuff. Askren Wrestling Academy has a great online service. There's so many options now to get better. Back then, it wasn't as easy. So, finding the club was something that made kids better over their cohorts much faster than it would now. And, I want to just touch on some, there was plenty of coaches who were on board. There was a bunch of guys that we had great relationships with and were really close, really close, good, lifelong personal friends, go to their kids' weddings, stuff like that. It's just the rest of them didn't see the benefit and felt like I was trying to make their kids something that they didn't respect. And some of the kids made that worse because they would be disrespectful. There were kids that looked at me in the stands. I never asked them to do that. Matter of fact, I would tell them, look at your coach. I would try to do the right thing, but kids are kids, and they would try to show me that they like me. It was so different because I was much younger too. I was closer in age to the guys, and they thought, I'll make John my friend too. I'll make him happy. But that didn't make me happy. It just made my life harder, made people like us less. It wasn't respectful, so it was not a good idea. And that caused a lot of problems too. Nowadays, the kids understand much better not to be disrespectful. I'm so much older, they think of me as an old man and an adult, not never a peer, but being so much younger. They deal with Khalid totally different than they deal with me and Anthony. Yeah.
Even Anthony's in the middle of that phase where he's kind of phasing out of being their buddy, and being more of an adult figure. Khalid's still their buddy a lot of times. So, it's totally just different because of the dynamic in our own club and how many kids we have.
Well, You know, it's a problem too, though. Like I remember, I don't know if you remember, John, but my sophomore year, that happened, right? I was in the semifinals against
Yes.
Manny Casting, and for me, it was more that. And again, I don't want to make this a bad thing on Kaleo because he did do a lot for me. There was things that he did that he cared about us, especially in our early career. But you know, John was saying the right stuff in the stands, and Kaleo was just kind of sitting there, right? So what am I supposed to do? I'm a 10th grader. I'm I'm in the mat. I'm scared shitless. I'm getting beat up, you know, by Manny Casting, who turned out to be like 24 years old. And I like that came out. He really was. And I was 15 years old.
Was that the semifinals or
semifinals and sectionals my sophomore year?
And you lost to a guy that was 24?
Well, I might be exact. He was in his 20s. That's real.
Oh, he shouldn't have been wrestling.
This is a true story. I'll interrupt you.
Did he win the section title?
He won a couple.
He was
after he graduated. I think he beat Marinelli in the section finals his senior year.
That same year. That's the year he beat me in the section.
And then a year later, he was arrested. And it said in the paper, 22-year-old Manny Casting. So he was 22 or 21 when he wrestled Mark.
You know,
give or take whatever month it was.
And that was the same year. And I'm 15 years old in the semifinals for the first time. And, you know, he's 21 years old, 6 years older than me. And Kaleo's kind of just sitting there, right? And John wants me to – I'm getting beat like 10-0 at this point, right? I'm getting beat up. But that's the way John coaches. He wanted me to keep going, keep fighting. And I hear John screaming in the stands. So I look over there, you know, just because I hear somebody giving me support. And Kaleo couldn't handle that. And it was bad. You know, it was bad. But it was weird. You know, everybody went back and forth. Then I wrestled back for third. And then, you know, all of a sudden Kaleo loved me again, and it wasn't a fight anymore. And it kind of bothered me because it was like, you know, John wasn't really doing anything wrong. He was just yelling. You know, he just wanted me to win. He wanted me to score.
He left the mat. He walked off the mat.
Yeah, it was bad. My dad
was really bad. Imagine a college coach getting mad because some kid's dad's yelling from the stands. So the college coach just walked out of the corner. But I mean, it was sad.
You know what the difference is, though, is you weren't wrong in that situation, but you've changed a lot. Now, I'm not going to name names, right? But there's other clubs that will be wrestling, and they'll be right in the coach's ear yelling, and it becomes becomes a crapshoot, right? There's somebody coaching, and there's 4 people behind them yelling all of these things, and to me, that's like the most disrespectful thing in the world.
Well,
you know, as a club coach, now me and John have a different thing going. Like John's the CEO. He's there. He'll show up to big tournaments. He'll train the kids and get ready. But then at the time when it's happening, he sits back and lets it happen. I'm on the ground a lot of times. Now John is because I own the guys too as well. But maybe 2 or 3 years ago, he really wasn't on the ground like that, right? And I refuse to, unless it's a really crazy situation, to say anything because it's not my place, right? And John does the same thing. And I feel like the coaches that gave him such a hard time 10, 15 years ago need to realize who's doing that and who's not doing that because it's different now. And I feel like
even when we did that, Anthony, we didn't do it. We did it from the stands just like a spectator. Yeah. I was never in the corner over a coach's ear. You know, I never went over and stood in the corner and tried to yell over a coach. I was in the stands and I was just almost like a spectator cheering. Now, I'm loud and people do listen to me, but that's not like the same thing. And I see what you're saying, and it's true. Other club coaches they want people to look at them. Like I was in the stands mixed in with people. I wasn't looking for attention. I just wanted our guys to win. And even that, I could realize why it'd be so annoying. And now that I'm older, I kind of realized like it wasn't the best strategy, and very rarely helped athletes. I mean, by the time you hear me, like, what are you going to do? The other kid hears me too. So it wasn't a great idea then. So obviously I learned from it and I stopped. But the younger coaches that are at some clubs, they're still doing it. And I don't think they understand that they're just hurting themselves. So as far as I'm concerned, they can just keep doing it and it'll help us more. But
the problem
does not build relationships.
I think the problem is that, like we were talking about before, though, some of those older coaches have such a grudge that they'll let that slide for other people. And they think back to 10, 15 years ago. And what I love about Coach Shortfager, and we were talking about it yesterday, is I don't think you need to be a young guy to be a good coach, right? You know, John's not old, Coach Sabell's not old, but you guys have been doing this for a while. Coach Shortfager's got to be close to 60 now, I would say. He graduated in 78, I believe. So he's got to be close to 60. And he does everything he can for those kids. And that includes, you know, getting into club wrestling. That includes off-season stuff, you know, not having a big ego, not letting his ego get – other than yesterday, I'd never heard about Coach Bill's wrestling career. You know, he's that kind of guy. And I feel like we have more people like that as ambassadors for our sport will be way better off, you know, because they won't be scared of the John Degls, because all the John Degls are going to do is help your kid, you know, like that's John gives a service. He's really good at his service, and you know, we need to take advantage of it. So to segue, you know, the main reason, John, we wanted to interview you is because you know, since me and Coach Bellis have been coaching, pretty much anybody on our team that's been really successful has also trained at the club. I can't think of somebody that has been.
Coach, can I say something about what you were just talking about?
Oh, go ahead, Coach. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The one thing I would say is that the younger coaches that are coming out now that I've seen are unbelievable. Like Brett Perry, Anthony Tortora, Alex De La Cruz, all these guys that are coming through the pipeline now are students of the game. They're not high school teachers that also coach wrestling. They're wrestling coaches that have other careers. A lot of times back in the day, there was, you know, there was not a lot of outside people coaching at all. It was all in-house. Hey, we need somebody to coach wrestling. Okay, you're the wrestling coach. You might be the wrestling coach for 25 years, and you only did it the 3 months. But now the caliber of coaching that's coming out, because they were wrestling since kids, going to the club, wrestling in college, coming out, they're unbelievable. I mean, it's great to have these people in the room.
It is great. I mean, there's so many more college wrestlers that are coming back to the area to help out coaching, and in our club and not in our club. I mean, it's going to benefit our athletes in our area tremendously to have those kind of guys around.
Yeah. So let's talk about, John, and I mean, it's from Burke, Greg, and me, I think it started, but, you know, I can list, like, you know, Greg, Burke, and myself, Ben Spiegel after us, a little bit after us. Then there's a little bit of a lull, and then, you know, Scotty Wims, Mitchell Klein, Kirby.
Bing Bing.
Bing Bing went to the club. Then you go to the high level guys here. Matt Schreiber, 2-time All-State. Aaron Walk, state champ. Jacob Ferrer, state finalist. Maybe talk a little bit about your relationship, because to me, the club has been real intricate in Fox Lane. It's been real intricate in Horace Greeley. It's been real intricate in John Jay Cross River. Mayapack. Mayapac's coming back again. I think Mayapack kind of went full circle. It was the beginning of Mayapack, and now it's back, getting back a little bit. You know, and even like schools like New Rochelle that maybe aren't supporting us as much as they used to, you know, their first state champ was a big club guy, you know, on Malcolm Island. So
that was a great match.
But let's mean that this is the Greeley one, and like I said, Fox Lane and John Jay, you know, they're probably the combined have won most of the last section titles in the last 10 years.
Edgemont, same thing.
Edgemont too. But speak about your relationship with Greeley and the guys that have come through.
Yeah. So the Greeley connection. I mean, obviously you've been you're a Greeley guy from the time you were in high school until, you know, now. Obviously working with you and the difference in our relationship now has made working with Greeley, you know, one of the best pleasures of my career as a coach, as a club coach, and seeing the transition. I mean, Mayapack had a tradition of wrestling long before, I was around, and they never won a section title. Joe Bellucci coached, his dad coached. We had some all-state guys. They also never had a state champ. I'm not saying that because I want to toot my own horn, but I was the first state champ in the history of Mayapack in any sport, period. No girls, no boys, nothing. So I was the first state champ ever. And so, you know, some of those schools had a tradition, and Greeley did kind of with Bill for a little bit. He was a state champ for Greeley way back when Section 1 didn't have very many state champs. And then Morgan Carey won a state title. And again, Section 1 still didn't have very many champs. But then Greeley kind of fell off the map and didn't have a program that was newsworthy. So, you know, when I got involved with them through you, I think actually Bill coached there first when I was in high school, because I used to go to open mats there. But with the club, you know, it's basically been through you and through Mike, you know, and it was nice because you could show that even if the culture hadn't turned the corner yet, any one athlete, and you could take Matt Schreiber, not a prototypical athlete, physically, even mentally, to be honest, at first. Um, you know, you got a kid like him who, if you put the time in and if you follow and have some faith, you can get really, really good results. And Greg Einfrank, I mean, he was on the other day. Greg, you would you would never think that that kid, if you looked at it from the outside, would be a state finalist and a college Division One wrestler. I watched his interview and watching him talk about when I set him straight. Um, he was definitely going down the wrong path in terms of his choices and being able to work with a kid like that who's smart, who's tough, but not from a wrestling school, and you know, just turning him into a little animal because of his work ethic was like the coolest thing you could do. It's easy to coach a guy like, I don't know, Joe Mazurko or something. Even though Mayapack had never won titles, they had a great tradition. They were always in the top 5 or 6 teams in the section out of the 40 teams. There's been these traditional teams, Ossining back then, and
Suffered.
some of the athletes suffering. They had great athletes and they had great programs and they just put out good kids all the time, which, that's great for them. But to break into that, you know, level that Greg was able to and that you were able to, and that Burke wasn't even a hard worker. You know, he didn't want to do the work. We had to whip him. We had to make him do the work. Same with Malcolm Allen. Malcolm did not want to do the work. That kind of stuff. To find out that New Rochelle had never had a state title. New Rochelle is one of the biggest sports schools in the area. It's got a huge population. It's got tremendous athletes. Their other sports are phenomenal. To find out they never had a state champ is nuts. I didn't know that. They brought me in to work out with him. He was already in the club, but we had to make him run. He did not want to run. We had to say nasty stuff to him and push him and like almost literally pick him up and make him take another step, even though he was too heavy to actually pick up. But he was needing a lot extra, and their coaches, to their credit, were willing to get him the extra help he needed and to collaborate. So, that was special. But the fact that I could do with you two on a more consistent basis, time and time again, year after year after year. It was difficult when Coach Kaleo was there because he just didn't want anything to do with me. So it was like an uphill battle, and we still were able to do it. We were still able to get Greeley back on the map. You three, or if you could have had a little bit of support, you guys would have won a team title because you put up tremendous amount of points. It's hard to have 3 champs on one team, and you guys were superstars.
What's crazy is it was the difference maybe in John's mentality. I remember my senior year at sectionals, and we had 3 champs that year, right? We were there was really no chance that any of us were going to lose. Although, I think me and Greg both wrestled kind of a crappy section finals. I wrestled Matt Shakin, who's a friend to today, but he was a club guy, and I was probably frozen a little bit. Didn't maybe put up as many points as I could have, and that's no slight at Matt, but my semifinals match, I ended up beating some suffering kid like 16-4. And here's John in the crowd, and he wants me to tech him, right? And I should have teched him, right? But I just didn't. If I had that, if me and you were in the corner of that match, we would have been probably looking for the more bonus points, right? And we would have been more assertive of like, hey, get 2 more takedowns or look for back points here. And I didn't have that, right? I had it from John, but he's up in the crowd, and people were upset that he was probably even saying anything to me, right? So. Looking back, who knows what happens if we score those points there. We had 3 section champs, like John said, and they were all guys that were brought in to the club, and to me, I look back at workouts from the club and those got me through a lot of my workouts in college, right? And now as a coach, if John's going over, and I'll do practice. Sometimes Brett will do practice, Khalid will do practice, but John will do stuff still, and I'll see it, and I'm like, I like that, and I implement that at Greeley. Right? I'm not trying to do just this my own thing. We learn off of John. John started it, right? John started it, and that started the connection with Greeley. And then when me and Greg and Burke started going and we were winning, Ben saw that, right? So Ben started doing it. And then, we had a little fall off. And now the next generation's like, all right, well, Scotty did this and he won. Mitchell did this. He was pretty good there too. Now we have the three guys that might have been three of the best. I would put Jacob, Matt, and Aaron in the top 5 in Greeley history, with Bill, and either Morgan or Greg there in that 5th spot, even though Morgan won a state title.
Steve Green too. Steve
Green's good too, but Greg lost to Lou Rudrell, who was one of the best ever in New York, and he was a 3-time section champ. His credentials were pretty good.
2-time All-State, section champ,
but
wrestler.
Like I said, I think Matt, Jacob, and Aaron are very much in the top ever in Greeley, and this is not a slight at Fox Lane. This is not a slight at John Jay Cross River. I feel like our guys that have gone to the club and that have bought in both at Greeley and both at the club have been the most successful. Like Aaron Walk pinned his way through a state title, right? Jacob Ferrer went from a kid that was a 500 record to a state finalist. Matt Schreiber, like John said, was not a prototypical athlete. He lost all of his youth matches and ended up being a 2-time All-State wrestler. So I feel like if they buy into the Greeley system and buy into the club system, they have the best of both worlds, and they should be able to be very successful. And it doesn't always happen.
Yep.
Well, I wish more kids would see the track record of some of their teammates and what they did, because like I said, Bill Swerfinger is a mentor and a good personal friend. I think they won 3 team titles, and that was again a large part of guys that were all training together year round at the club and John Jay. And Bill does the weight room in the mornings, and now his son does it. They're really bought in. But Ryan Osley was the only state champ, and he was a North Salem kid, but he wrestled them. I mean, it was 100% because he was at the John Jay room. I would love to see Bill have 6 state champs. Unfortunately, it's like sometimes difficult to get some of these guys to train the way their former teammates did. I mean, Genovese, Waterson, Osley, those guys were like really bought in and had great careers. I mean, I think Scott Genovese might have won a state title, except Brundage was there. Like, he wasn't going to beat Brundage, Unfortunately for him, he just didn't have the athleticism or the speed, but he was super tough and really good. Billy Waterson, a lot of those guys just ran into hammers and they couldn't quite get over the top to be that state champ, where, like Aaron, he was able to do it, and he was able to do it in dominating fashion. Unfortunately, Jacob had Logan in front of him, who was one of the Section 1 best wrestlers in the history of Section 1, unscored upon in 2 years, the kid was. So, we have all these really good memories of these guys, and these kids they see the Hall of Fame pictures and the wall. And I know Swerfinger does a tremendous job of advertising the past, and giving present opportunities. You guys do a tremendous job. I mean, you create more opportunities than almost any coach could possibly do. There's no excuse for your athletes, but they got to get on board and do the work. And I think that's where sometimes these kids fall short. They start off doing the work, and then the summer comes, or they have finals, or they have to study for the SATs, and they start thinking they got to be doing one thing. Like, I got to study for the SATs. I have to get my GPA up. Whereas kids in the past did it too. I mean, Osley's at Harvard, Lindsay's at, UPenn, Brown for Greg Einfrank, Columbia for Penn. I mean, the list of Ivies and tremendous schools and Cornell is endless. We have tons of guys who did it all. And I think that's the problem with some of the parents who get tunnel vision on school. They think school is the most, I mean, if I could end, not necessarily that I want to end, but if I could get one point across more than anything in this interview, it's that there's a lot of parents that in the end come to me and said, I wish I listened a little bit more to you. And I know that's a weird thing to say because, it sounds like I'm promoting myself, but there's a lot of kids with 95 averages and 1,500 SATs that can't get into Harvard and can't get into Wharton and can't get into Williams because there's so many kids that now have those grades, but there are very few state champs. And Aaron Wolk was not going to be able to go to Brown until he took second at Eastern States. Despite his tremendous grades and all the extracurriculars and everything he did, I was flat out told that he was number 13 out of 7 guys they can support. And then he did better in wrestling. And I got a phone call. So I called Aaron immediately. He said, you can go to Brown if you still want to. They see how good you are now. And that second place in Eastern States opened the door for a likely letter, you know, and that is a fact, even though probably people don't want to talk about it because you're supposed to be strictly academic at the Ivies. But I got a phone call right after Super 32. Clifton got into Stanford. He already committed to Harvard, but Stanford, he was at the first, he was his number 1 school. He went to camp in 10th grade at Stanford just to let him know, and he went back in 11th grade, I think, because he wanted to go to Stanford, and he couldn't get in guaranteed. He might have got in anyway. His grades were unbelievable, but there was no guarantee of getting into Stanford. And at that level, you want to go early decision because you don't want to gamble. You want to know you're in. And they wouldn't give him a likely letter or an NLI, and Harvard would give him the likely letter. So he committed to Harvard the next day almost. I mean, it wasn't quite the next day, but within a week, I got a call from Stanford, and they're like, we want him. He's in our top 7. I was like, he's already going to Harvard, but I'll tell him. And he's like, I like Harvard. I'm going to Harvard. So you can do it all, and the more you try to do it all, the better off you'll be. If you just think that if I just get the 1300, I can get into that school. If I just get that A+, I can get into that school. It's not that simple. So for these guys who want to wrestle in college and go to the best schools in the country, you have to have a well-rounded resume. You have to have excellent grades. If you're a 4-time state champion, you have C's, you're not going to Princeton. But, I mean, Grant Cuomo does not have the grades to be at Princeton, except the fact that he's a superstar in high school and a state champ and All-American. And so for these kids who are at Greeley and who have parents who think, you know, the grades are the most important, they're the prerequisite, but they're not going to put you over the top. Even if you have perfect scores, you can't guarantee a spot at Williams.
Well, that's Izzy. That's Izzy. She did an unbelievable job, and she's getting a full academic scholarship, I believe, to Michigan, which is unbelievable. And
right, but she wanted to go to Yale.
But if my kids ever did that, I'd be super happy. But like she couldn't do any more. She couldn't do any more.
Right, she couldn't have done a better job.
No.
Unfortunately, she's a girl, and they don't have wrestling in Yale anyway.
And that's the problem.
So
and
there was no leverage.
That's the perfect example, though, of doing everything right, you know, and it still sometimes isn't enough, right? You need like a little extra, like maybe, you know, like the state title or whatever it may be. We're going to wrap up soon, but I want to bring up 2 quick things and then we'll wrap up. But, you know, to speak on the club thing again, like John said, it's difficult for him to coach a high school team because, you know, he has to deal with competing. And I love to see the Fox Lane guys win, right? Like Nino is a great kid. I love that kid. I want to see him win. I was standing next to John, I believe, when Quincy won the semis at States. I was so fired up for him because he's a good kid. But it does become frustrating when you know that 13 of their 15 starters are training year-round at the club, and I'm with John coaching these guys, and 3 Greeley guys are, right? And when they get there, the Greeley guys, they love it. They like John, they like Coach, they like us, they love me and you, they love being around wrestling. It's just getting them over that threshold.
And even if they don't like me, it doesn't matter because it's not like when we were in Millwood and I was the coach and that was it. You know, right now they have you, they have Alex, they have Khalid, they have Brett Perry, you can go to Connecticut. You can train with other coaches. They have tons of members that are friendly. You know, there's so much more. If you happen to not, jive with my personality, you know, you don't need to be directly involved with me anymore. Whereas that wasn't always the case in the past.
Even then, But even then, it's frustrating, right? Because
It
this
is.
is
I
this is the
understand what you're
recipe.
saying.
This is the recipe to success. And like I said, I want to see these guys win that we coach at the club because that's my job too, right? So to see a Quincy and a Nino do well, I'm very happy for them, right? I love Nino. I want him to win a state title next year. I hope he wins a state title next year. But where's our heavyweight at? Where are these guys that could be good too and be doing that? And it's not. Most of the time when we have guys come onto the Greeley team, they stay with us. They love DeBellis. DeBellis is the best. They love them. I have a good relationship with all these kids. But maybe it's like the confidence or the belief that they could be that person is a little hard for them maybe to grasp. But it is frustrating when I talk to A-Rod after sectionals and he's like, thanks to you, John, and, Khalid and Brett and these guys, thanks for getting my guys better and preparing them. And I love that he says that and he's that guy and he's humble and he has no ego and he says things like that. But at the same time, it's like, it's frustrating. We need our guys to be committed like that because like I said before, I feel like it's the best of both worlds. Like you could, I'm running the Greeley practice similar to what John would run the Empire practice as, right? Like, so if Empire is one of the more successful clubs in the country, and you can't argue that is one of the more successful clubs in the country, and I'm running my practice similar to what the club's doing, why are we, like, look at what happened with Jacob. Look what happened with Aaron. Those guys won. And Jacob wasn't the guy that was supposed to be that good. He made humongous jumps throughout his career, and it was because he bought in and he believed in the process, and he got really good.
You have guys like Kovacs who are leaving my practice at Iona to scrimmage so they can go and wrestle you.
Yeah, it's frustrating. And I love AJ, and I loved having AJ in the room here and there, right? Because it helped the other kids. But it's like, why does AJ trust me, John, and the whole system of it, right? Like, it worked out for him, but why? Why does he trust it? I think that's something that we need to get across. The last thing I want to leave it on, though, John, before I go, because Kara's going to get mad, and I got to pick up our dinner. But everybody, I think people are starting to realize now that John's a good person and he's not this crazy, like, whatever. If you get to know John well, John's probably more emotional than I am. And I'm sorry to put that out there, John, in public. But John's an emotional guy. He loves his kids. And I'm talking about his wrestlers. Of course, he loves his actual children. But he loves his wrestlers. Big heart. I wish I freaking brought it up. So my mom, and I wanted to put this, I forgot to bring it up to the interview, but it would have been awesome. My mom's cleaning out the house. So she gave me all of this like wrestling medals, trophies. My dad was really good with keeping like a scrapbook of like newspaper clippings and, stuff of that nature. So I was going through it and 2 cards came out, only 2 cards, personal cards, right? So I'm like, what the heck is this? I didn't remember it. So I opened it. The first one I read was from John, my junior year in high school. And it was going to states. And he was basically saying, I guess we argued about what weight class I would go because I was cutting way too much weight. I shouldn't have been cutting nearly as much weight as I was. Luckily, it didn't affect me too much my junior year because I ended up placing that year. But he put in the card, it was something like, you did it your way. I'm super proud of you. You're going to kill it tomorrow. I love you like a son, something along those lines, right? And it was really nice. Then the next one was from my senior year where I was like the second seed. I was ranked second in the state all year, and behind Gregor Gillespie, who ended up being an NCAA champ, and he fights in the UFC now. And I ended up blowing it, and I had a card also from John saying like, it was really hard, and I'm sorry, John, to put you on blast on these, your soft side, but it was really hard watching, you not reach your goal because you worked as hard as you could. And I know you worked as hard as you could to get it. And I got to tell Sean this too. And if my son grows up to be anything like you, I'll be very happy. And people that know John know that he would say something like that. But those old time coaches that have such a hard time with him would never understand that he would write something like that. And that, to me, that kind of frustrates me a little bit because they have this negative stigma. And it's like, you don't even really know him. You know him as a high school kid that used to be crazy and just beat guys up because he was a competitive wrestler and a young coach, but you don't know him as an adult father, business owner, club owner. And that, to me, it annoys me a little bit because it's like you're kind of judging and you don't know what's going on. And you don't know the relationship he had with guys like me, guys like Greg Frank, guys like Malcolm Allen, guys like Khalid. You could go, the list is long. So, I mean, if we're going to end it with anything, I think that's kind of something that hopefully people understand, especially Greeley people that are thinking of doing off-season wrestling. It's the place that we should be training. John can come on thick sometimes, but it's because he's passionate and cares about the sport and he cares about the kid. And that needs to be, put out there. So anyway, John, do you have anything else before we wrap this sucker up?
I would like to thank both of you for the opportunity to talk about, stuff and just kind of let people see an unvarnished, discussion amongst friends, to get to know us better. And I think the Greeley community probably realizes how lucky they are, but like we all fail at when we're in it, even if we know it, we don't always know it to the extent until it's gone. I know with my daughter and with my sons, I relish being with them. I know they're going to grow up fast. I can see it already. Sean's already turning into a man. And I'm nostalgic for the days when he was younger. And then I think back to the days when he was younger and I was pulling my hair out because, he was a kid and it's difficult when they're kids. I mean, diapers are a difficult age. And then there's the disobedience era. And then there's the, whiny era. And then, every era of a kid, every kind of phase, you kind of have the negatives and the positives, but then you get a little bit older and you're nostalgic for the past. You're nostalgic for the past. So the Greeley families that have you now are probably super appreciative. I think they realize what they have because you're so far heads and tails above every other program. I mean, Fox Lane's tremendous in their results, and A-Rod does put in the time and energy and does the lifts and stuff with him. But he's kind of a one-man guy. Like, he doesn't have the support staff. He doesn't have Alex Khalid, you, Boyle last year or the year before, Mike Tabellas, and the family support at Greeley is even more than, Fox Lane's got good boosters, but you have more support than almost any program, maybe except John Jay, because Bill Swertfigger is like the genius of every level of marketing and support, and he does it all. But, I think for Greeley, they have to understand they're in it right now. And instead of looking back and going, wow, those coaches really cared about our kids and they really wanted to help, I would like them to let you guys help even more and be as grateful as they can be and realize that you are already probably doing the best job in the country at making a program, not coaching wrestling only, not being good mentors, not being good advocates for their children, but for the whole program. The way you guys do it and what you're doing now during the coronavirus and how you guys approach each kid, and especially since you're dealing with a smaller population, you're not the biggest school, you're not in Arlington, what you guys can get out of the smaller population, the population of kids that don't come from a wrestling culture, their moms and dads, didn't have uncles and brothers and dads that wrestled. So your efforts are tremendous, and your program's tremendous. And I think that's what I want to leave this on. Have everybody watching understand how much you have committed to it, how much you've sacrificed for it, how much personal time you've taken away from your wife and kids and loved ones to the greater good of Greeley wrestling and the Greeley community in large, not just wrestling, the school. There should be a feather in your cap for what you do for that whole community. So I want to thank you for that. And, I love you guys both very much. I mean, Anthony, I don't know if you're more like a brother or a son now that you're older. I just try to call you a brother.
Don't call me old. I've been
not that old, but I'd say like brother now.
I've been really in my head about aging, so let's not go down that road. But John, we appreciate it. Like John said, I really hope people watch these, and like the Mr. Klein is coming up next week, and David Shriver went, and to hear from the parents and hear from somebody like John, who's been a beacon in the wrestling world for a really long time, it means a lot. Coach Tabellas, you got anything before I sign us off?
I thought you did a terrific job. Thank you very much for coming on. It's been a pleasure, and we're going to have a lot of future state champs together. Hey, one question. Carmel got their first state champ. Do you know who it was?
I do know a kid named PJ Duke, yes.
7th grader.
Actually, I'm going to say this since you brought it up. The first state champ in Mayapack history, John Degl. The first state champ in Carmel history, Club Guy. The first state champ in North Salem wrestling history, Club Guy. The first state champ in Shell, Club Guy. The first, the level of firsts that have happened around
Was there
First
a
state
state
champ in
champ?
boxing history, Steven Rodriguez, right?
I think so.
I'm
Could be
I'm
wrong.
going to say one controversial thing since I haven't said anything controversial.
All right, you might as
I
well.
would like to know how you get into the Hall of Fame with 400 plus victories, like a certain coach in Mayapack, and never win a team title.
You know,
And I coached 1 year and won a team title.
but you're in the Hall of
Yeah.
Fame. You're in the Hall of Fame.
He's in the National Hall of Fame. I'm just in Section 1 Hall of Fame.
Oh,
You'll work your way up.
you'll get there.
Listen, we've only been coaching. I've been technically head coach for what, 3 years, coach, with you?
Let's call it 5.
Well, the shorter it makes
Call
it
it
look
7.
better.
When did you walk in the door?
The shorter it
That's
makes
the
it look
day you were
better.
head coach.
Yeah, but the shorter it makes it look better. And I got Aaron Walk with you now, so that's state champ in 2 or 3 years of coaching. I'll take it.
Exactly.
But anyway,
I wish I would have came on when you guys were there because I was at that school.
Coach, you know what? Let's not go too long because I don't want to run like this. But
Yeah,
I will say, though, real quick, with John's support in the club, and if you were the head coach with no ego, I mean, maybe it wouldn't have been me 4th, Greg 2nd, Burke 3rd. It might have been a little different, might have been a couple first places there. But that's to be, you never know. You can't, we can't cry over something that didn't happen. But anyway, John, I appreciate it. DeBellis, you're the man. I'm going to stop recording. John, stay for 1 second.